Good morning and welcome to all. Myself Nadia and I am coming from Kozhikode. My native place is Kundakulam. So today we are going to discuss about pollen pistil interaction, and this portion is coming under sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Actually, this sexual reproduction in flowering plants have three phases, that are pre-fertilization events, then post-fertilization events, then pre-fertilization events, fertilization events, then post-fertilization events. So this pollen pistil interaction comes under pre-fertilization events, that the events which takes place before fertilization. And coming under this pre-fertilization events, another important terms are gametogenesis as well as and also pollination. Gametogenesis and pollination comes along in the pre-fertilization events. I think already that portion is discussed, that gametogenesis and pollination. Today I am going to discuss pollen pistil interaction. So in this portion, first of all, when this is an overall rough diagram of a plant, that is inner portion of a plant. This color, that is red, green, blue color, are different types of pollen. And this portion, this black color stack is stigma, and the pollen sits or comes within the stigma. This portion is pistil of the flower. So the pollen which comes onto the stigma has three fates. First, if the pollen which is coming onto the stigma is compatible. What do you mean by compatible? Compatible means the stigma, that is this pollen which is of the species same as that of the flower. Both the flower and pollen comes under same species, then that pollen will be compatible. If the compatible pollen comes onto the stigma, so what happens? Fertilization occurs between this pollen and also the stigma. This may result in the formation of a pollen tube which reaches the female gamete ovule. So fertilization and formation of pollen tube, everything occurs if the pollen tube is compatible. Second fate is that if the entered pollen, it is coming from different species. If it is of different species, so what happens? So it is not capable of fertilization. So no fertilization occurs and no formation of pollen tube and no entry of this pollen within the female gamete ovule. Then third important fate, if the pollen is from the same plant. If it is from the same plant, then also the pollen is incompatible. It is not capable of fertilization and leads to the post-fertilization events doesn't take place. So these are the three important fates. So the pollination, from this we should understood that the pollination does not give any guarantee to whether the fertilization which may occurs between the pollen as well as within the pistil will be correct. Not every pollination will be correct because there are different types. For example, I shown the red color pollen, that is of compatible pollen. The another green color pollen is incompatible, coming from different species. Blue color pollen is also incompatible, coming from same species. So no fertilization occurs, only the compatible pollen, the fertilization occurs. Then, so the pistil also, this is the flower portion, female portion pistil also has the ability to recognize the right pollen. അതായത് if the pollen is compatible only, the pistil recognizes that pollen and which leads to the fertilization events. If the pistil pollen is from the different species, or if the pollen is from same species, the pistil doesn't recognize it, just reject that pollen and no fertilization events occurs. So the pistil also has the ability to recognize the pollen whether it is right type. Then so the ability of the pistil to recognize the pollen, which may result in the acceptance of that pollen by the pistil, or either if it is not compatible, it may occur the rejection of that pollen. And this ability, which may result in the interaction between the pollen and pistil, that is known as pollen pistil interaction. The interaction that occurs between the pistil and the pollen are called pistil pollen or pollen pistil interaction. So, and these interactions can be mediated by certain chemical compounds. That is, the chemical compounds which are present in the pollen, as well as those chemical compounds are also present within the this portion, stigma or pistil portion. The chemical components which are present within the pistil, chemical components which are present within the pollen, both of them they mediate an interaction because of certain types of chemical components. So these chemical components also mediate the interaction. The interaction is mediated by these chemical components present in both pollen as well as in the pistil. Then okay, so that is called pollen pistil interaction. And when the pollen pistil interaction, it is the group of events that occur from the time of pollen deposition. So these events, that is pollen pistil interaction, this may occur after the deposition of the pollen onto the stigma. This event takes place and to the time up to the entry into the ovule. So after the entry of deposition of the pollen onto the stigma until the entry of the pollen tube within the ovule, until to this step, these interactions may occur. So this step, until to this step, is coming under pollen pistil interaction. If the pollen is compatible, so the stigma which possesses certain nutrients and water, so this pollen utilize this nutrients from the stigma and water. If it is compatible, it is capable of utilizing water and nutrients within the stigma. And utilizing this, it may result in the formation of a pollen tube, which may lead to the germination and fertilization. So the compatible pollens are able to absorb water and nutrients from the surface of the stigma. They germinate and produce pollen tubes. So these are all about pistil pollen interaction, that is interaction between the pollen and the pistil, and their interaction can be mediated by certain chemical components which are present in both pistil and pollen, and three important fates are responsible for a pollen when it comes onto the pistil or stigma of a flower. One, it can be either compatible, means of same species, or the pollen can be from different species, so no compatibility, that is incompatible, no fertilization. And if the pollen can be of the same plant, that name is that hermaphrodites in which the fertilization occurs between the same plants. If the pollen is from the same plant, so it is known as incompatible, so no fertilization occurs. So these are all about pollen pistil interaction. Thank you.